Welcome to ARTV. I'm Jason Diggs, and I'm here with Zach Robinson. Hey, Zach.
Hey, brother. Yeah.
Yeah, it's good to see you again. We've known each other for quite some years.
hmm Yeah, I think I met you when I went to the Integral Center to
Mhm.
do some of the circling training. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're from the Houston community. You've been down there for many, many years, helping lead that
Mhm.
community, and you're off to new adventures and new places.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I'm hoping to take all the stuff I've been doing in Houston and what I've been doing with some of the stuff online and hopefully doing that in Puerto Rico soon.
Mhm. So let's talk a little bit about the depth of facilitation, because what I know is like you're almost like the master of subtlety, like the way that you speak about authentic relating. um, it's different than other teachers and facilitators I've talked to. So
Mm.
what does being a facilitator mean to you?
That's a big question. What does it mean to me? Uh, you know, I think it's been a vehicle for me to kind of scratch one of my biggest itches. Uh, I can like my past was really wanting a lot of safety was a big thing for me, and I was constantly like trying to mediate everything around me, uh, and I was finding that I kind of always ended up needing to be in a situation for it to go well. And from there, the facilitation has been for me is uh, essentially helping people grow the skills to not need somebody like me there to mediate or hold space or to track nuances or whatever other nuance, like whatever other things that like facilitation is to me. It's a uh, like pointing people at a thing and going, try that for a little bit and like experience it and get a handle of it. And then eventually you'll get it. And then eventually you'll integrate it. And then eventually you'll implement it. It's kind of like what facilitation is for me. It's like pointing somebody at a thing and like, go try that. No, try that. And it's like a low stake environment through facilitation and then just kind of getting your hands on it. And now all of a sudden, like you've been practicing so long for it's almost like a emotional like fighting, and then like you get into the real world and like now like there's a fight happening and like you can like maneuver and like submit and like everybody's okay again, and it just feels like helping people be with uh, like the deeper qualities of self through focus and practice, and then gathering that data and then acting on it. So facilitation to me has just been
Mm,
yeah, how do we get down to the things that are happening with us and it's happening with you and it's happening between us,
mm,
uh, and then try to build some skills and some resilience to that. Is
mm.
kind of what facilitation's been for me. It's like us hanging out in the places where I keep hearing everybody wants to be, but we all can kind of suck at being there.
Yeah, resilience training. I like that. Um,
Mm.
Facilitation for me is often like, oh, I get the joy of um, creating, setting up a situation or creating a situation where people get to like encounter new aspects of themselves. It's almost like
Mm.
this um, setting up a playing board where it's like, okay, there's a bunch of obstacles over here and there's a path over there, and like you have to go around this bend, and then you're face to face with your own hologram, or like the ways that you've been creating your own relational field, right? Your own reality
Mm.
in a certain way. And it's almost like gently steering people towards their relational blind spots, because that's the place of the most fertile growth. And I think you and I share that love or that passion. Facilitation can also just be a way to build community. It could be a way to um, introduce people to each other and have make friends and enjoy one another as human beings and get our belonging needs met. But I think there's these deeper layers of encountering our soul, like
Mm.
like the way that you would encounter a soul when you read an amazing novel. you know
Right.
that can
Uh,
actually happen through an authentic relating game night.
totally. It does actually. I think often that experience of like coming in contact with another human being in such a way that it's just like wow, that was awesome. Like, I never knew that about you. Or like, I feel so like inspired or like heartbroken in this like really sincere way. Like, there's just like so much life that takes place. Uh, have you ever played one of the games that I came up with called call it Life Story? Have you ever played Life Story?
No.
Oh man, it's one of my favorites. It's like such a low effort game, but such like deep like a connection comes from it. All it is like a 7 minute window of uninterrupted time of telling whatever chunk of your life story you want in
Mm.
whatever frame you want. And then you get two other partners you're playing with you that just throw curiosity questions at you afterwards.
Yeah.
And then give the gifts of like what I think I get about you now and like
Mm.
what I wish for you, you know? And it's just like doing that with three people, just 7 minutes of talking about your life story. It's just, I could sit and do that for days, honestly. It's just so fun.
I want to sit and do that with you and a group of people. That would be so fun.
It would be, yeah. Especially the people we hang out with, because we hang out with people that have had really eclectic lives. And so,
So you've been innovating around this practice and creating some of your own games and leading in Houston. What else are you doing professionally? Like, where have you taken this work?
currently, one of my endeavors is, well, I'd like to name like my overarching desire is to kind of get these social technologies is kind of what I see authentic relating practices at the point
Mhm.
into the consciousness of as many people as possible.
Mm.
And how can we validate it without it being like woo woo, feel good, touchy feely stuff that some people are put off by? And then how do we make sure that we don't have it be so practice that it feels fake to other people? You know, like there's like a where's that sweet spot? So what I'm doing is I'm wanting to get into places with authentic relating where it brings clout. And then I'm also really loving that there's starting to be some research done in the scientific field of like what it's doing socially and what it might be doing even neurologically. So these are some of like the art, like far-ending goals that I have for authentic relating. But at this point, I'm currently training a group of facilitators in the Google community, and like I've got my first batch of facilitators up and running, and we're about to do our second batch of facilitators, and starting to branch out into other organizations where um, we're just showing up to do the practice. It's not just the psychoeducation, but like let's just show up every week and do the wax on, wax off of authentic relating,
Mhm.
uh, so that we can start implementing that more in the workspace, so that
Mm.
there's clearer communication and all that other stuff. That and the other thing that I'm taking this, I've taken it into families is a
Mm.
big one that I've been doing. Uh, I essentially call it like low stakes communication with high reward. Essentially, like the I find that there's like this story that families should love and get along and communicate, and I find people really want to live up to that story, that mythos or whatever. And so there's a lot of drive and a lot of needs wanting to be met in family that um, there's just so many miscommunications. There's so many lack of abilities to be with something that doesn't feel comfortable. So I try to spend time with people to like facilitate authentic relating games in family until we can start getting into the heavier conversations and really unpacking and being with what's it like being your son, or what's it like having like being your mother, like really having these conversations and talking about things in ways that we're humanizing one another, validating one another, and then learning to be accountable for how we show up, you know. Like one of my greatest principles that I try to live by is a good reason isn't a good excuse to treat anyone poorly.
Mhm.
uh, I think a lot of that can happen in family, like things make sense for how we're treating one another. That doesn't excuse it. And how do we start shifting how we show up, even if something is still feeling painful or unsafe or
Mm.
scary, you know? Like how do we approach that?
Mm.
And so uh, that's where I've been taking the work is I call it the season of not making things worse, you know? Like how do we get things from getting worse? Let's just stop, and then the skills that we learn there are really good ones for getting us to go in a good direction. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
that's
Yeah. I imagine that uh, feeling like sacred work. being with people who have the same DNA and they have these blood ties and getting in there. And well, let me ask you this. What's the difference
Mhm.
between that and therapy? Like, is the approach have a lot of overlap or a little bit of overlap? Like, what do you
I
what do
wouldn't
you
be surprised
actually
if there's lots of overlap, except for I'm not trying to heal anything deep and generational or um, and I guess what feels different is one thing is I get to be in the mix. Like if I'm playing an authentic relating game and if I'm facilitating something, I normally actually play with them. So I'm being vulnerable and raw and real and giving my own data in a way that um, I get to model.
Mhm.
Where I imagine that there's like a keeping more of your personal information to yourself in a therapeutic setting. So it's like I'm actually creating relationships with these people as well in a way
Mhm.
that like I have so many people that I love. Like I'm actually looking forward to firing clients because I was like, you don't need me anymore and we can just be friends now. You know,
Yeah.
like I've done that. I fired a client. Like, I was like, man, I don't think you need me. Like I love you. And if you could be my client for the rest of my life, that would probably make me really happy. And you're good. Like
Mhm.
call me when you need me. But I don't think you need me right now. And yeah, it's like working myself out of business. But back to the question, how it's is it same? Is it different? Yeah, I think there's a lot of sameness because the pain from therapy is still in the session that I'm with.
Yeah. The pain of how we're affecting one another.
Mhm.
Yeah. Mhm. And then you're also playing games with them.
For sure. Yeah. I'd be like, let's just do this practice, like just in the middle of a session, like this is not going in a direction that I think is healthy, or I think we're trying to communicate, we're missing each other. Let's just throw the empathy game in right now. And we're just going to focus on hearing one another and making sure that we feel validated and having the experience of it, you know, and then shifting some of the unconscious beliefs because you haven't experienced its contrary now,
Yeah.
things like that.
Beautiful. I know you're working with Authentic Revolution and the ALT, some of
Mhm.
the new versions coming out online. And um, yeah, what's been that relationship like with you and Sarah in that organization?
I have such like a deep love for Sarah. Um, like I guess the way that I see it is I'm a street kid, I'm feral by nature. And uh Sarah is more of like the academic uh end of the universe that gets to bring some of the clout of that with her. And I feel seen by her and invited in for what I'm good at, which is like being with people and staying with it. And so the whole experience of being with Authentic Revolution has been a space where I feel like I've really been able to contribute and be myself to the point where I've felt validated enough to trust myself has been the experience.
Hmm.
Right. Like I feel deeply grounded in like, yeah, I do have the ability to be with people and to do this work and that I don't come from your orthodox way of being here
Yeah.
doesn't make what I'm doing any less valid or healthy or helpful. And, doing the work there has been really great because uh, it's just fun being a part of the innovation and also at this point there's like years of experience, like I've been doing this for like 8 years almost, and
Hmm.
the the nuances and the discernments and the tracking and just the overall like from what I've done, this is what I've seen that works and here's some nuances to that and here's why, and then like uh, creating spaces that seem to continuously get healthier and cleaner and better and more productive and which is why I like that this is like social technologies and practices.
Hmm.
And I really love teaching them to people. I've got playing in my head right now. It's just like a woman that I helped facilitate train sat down next to me. She was like, "I'm the mother I've always wanted to be after doing this."
Wow.
Yeah. And like both of us just kind of crying on the couch and like giving her a hug just out of gratitude that like Sarah has given me an opportunity to show up and train people and teach people these skills and hold them and support them in being in the discomfort of, oh wow, this is me. And then here's some ways that I can show up differently and that impacts our lives in a net positive way. And yeah, it's like just in an empowerment movement, and being a part of that feels really nourishing. Like I'm just like almost giddy with gratitude
Mhm.
experientially right now. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, there's this teaching that I learned from Sarah in 2015. So I led the ALT with her in Boulder
Mm-hmm.
3 times. I brought her out to the Integral Center and kind of arranged that and enrolled the course with a lot of my people, and we led it together. And um, she has this teaching that she calls leadership vacuum, which is like, I'm going to show up with inspiration and clarity and like here's what we're doing, here's the reason we're doing it, y'all get into it, what did you learn, and then there's like this kind of ghosting feeling of like, all right, what next? And because there's that empowerment that's built up over the experience, there's this 3 or 4 or 5 step process of like a little bit of empowerment being built in every single person in the room. And then the leader steps back, and then there's this vacuum. And what happens in those moments is really, really beautiful. Um, I adapted one of the games that I learned from her. She used to call it leadership mudra, but I call it leadership anarchy. And we toss the leadership stick in the middle, and someone grabs it and they lead whatever they want to lead, and then they get feedback on their leadership. Um, and so what I know, like, and it's like the spirit of authentic revolution, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I remember a year or a year and a half ago, I was talking with Sarah of like, does the word authentic revolution, does that still fit for you? Because it's like, it's a little bit of a turn off for people who are from a more traditional background, or,
Mm-hmm.
especially traditional companies. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and we talked about it. She's like, yeah, maybe, I don't know, let's think of something new. And then after we were in conversation for like 2.5 weeks, I think we were both like, no, it's a revolution. And there's
Mm-hmm.
there's something about us, the spirit of it, of, you know, this person teaches this person, and then this person goes to a new city and teaches a new set of people, and they don't even necessarily know where all these things came from. And
Mm-hmm.
like the names of the game change. Like I took Sarah's version of the empathy game, added a bunch of things to it, and called it the empathy game in my book. Like, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like
Mm-hmm.
2 different things, but like I had my own thing that I really wanted to convey.
Mm-hmm.
One of them being like, do you want advice? It's like consent for how I respond to what you're saying is so important, and it's part of empathetic listening to have consent. And so, I wanted to teach that piece, and so I included an extra round, and
Mm-hmm.
and that's happening all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
These
And
innovations.
I even love what comes up in that question that you just posed in regards to like getting consent. The inverse of the consent is like knowing what you actually want.
Mhm.
I think that one's beautiful. Like I have a process that I call the heading home process that I do with a friend of mine. It's a daily call that we take an hour to do. Um, it's essentially like an empathy practice in the beginning where we get like 5 minutes to just say whatever needs to be said, whatever's on your heart, whatever's alive, however you want to frame that.
Mhm.
And then we tell the other person what we're needing. Like, do I need to be mirrored right now? Do I need some validation right now? Do I need to hear your own intuition and insight? Do I need some coaching? Just like, what am I needing right now from another human being with what's big on my heart? And uh, that's the cool thing about some of these things about like, there's almost like another thing that we can look at. that's coming up. Like if we're trying to enroll somebody, and like I've had the experience of wanting to say yes to somebody, but really also wanting to say no. And then that being like that uncomfortable, like, and then like not knowing what to do about that or how to operate or move forward. And
Mm,
then learning through like the enrollment practice that Sarah teaches, there's like a quality of I'm a yes to you, but a no to your request. And like having those discernments, how like powerful those little things come from of like, if I'm really learning how to slow down and check in with like this one nuance, how these other nuances come online. And now I get to keep going down all these like different discernments and rabbit holes, which is what you were said like you were talking about earlier.
yeah.
Like I pay attention to those. Those are the like my prediction machine comes online. Like, ooh, well if that goes that way, well maybe this goes this way. Like it's like a giant spider web of how we can potentially relate with one another. If I watch you long enough, you might go this direction, and like what do you actually want and how do we want to do that? I just feel like I'm nerding out now. So
Well, that's what this is for. This dialogue is
yeah.
definitely for nerding out,
Mhm,
because you and I are people who have really made this our life path. You
mhm,
know?
mhm,
And, for those listening, I just want to say, like, that's on the menu, right? If you want to take these practices and, create more connection with your family of origin through, doing some of the easier, more accessible sentence stems at the dinner table, after Thanksgiving or something like that, that's on the menu. If you want to, really learn the art of repair and conflict transformation so that you can um, go deeper with a friend or with a spouse and have real authentic intimacy, like that's on the menu. And it's
mhm,
also on the menu to have this be a life path. What does that mean? It's not authentic relating just as a community building tool, not just as a set of communication practices. It's as an awareness practice. So moment by moment, welcoming everything, assuming nothing, which really means noticing our assumptions and checking our assumptions, and like all of the myriad of learnings and growths that happen inside the soul when we take that on as a daily practice and we take that on in all of our relationships, right?
mhm,
And so those of us like you and I who have done that, um, it has a certain psychoactive um, attribute to it,
mhm,
right?
mhm. It's like what's most alive for me right now is I would love to hear like where are you on that journey of like having this be in your daily life? Uh, like what does that even look like? I would love to hear like what that means for you in this moment.
Hmm. Yeah, it's really about life purpose and like the calling that I have has shifted a lot.
Mm,
Um, I see that you're like turning tides and like interviewing the interviewer, which I love that, but I want to name it before I go on. Um, I spent years teaching circling and teaching circling facilitation, and then I spent years uh, teaching authentic relating.
mm,
As a set of communication skills and practices for people to bring back in their lives in authentic relating facilitation.
mm,
I've helped train uh, about 500 facilitators in the last
mm,
7 years, or been the main trainer for a lot of facilitators as well. And I got to a certain place last summer where I'm like, oh, I put myself out of a job. Like I'm no longer one of the best because there's just so many of us. There's dozens and dozens of people who are out there doing this
mm,
as their main calling in life. And
mm,
that wasn't the case, 5 years ago when Sarah and I were still in the early days of spreading this in different organizations. Um, so there's just so many people out there capable of leading an authentic relating game night or leading connection practices. Or, one of my recent students, she is doing a whole program for teens using authentic relating, right? And I'm like, wow, like I'm not going to be the best at any of these things anymore. And I don't like, and so like my drive and to actually improve my own facilitation just dropped. It just disappeared. And I was like, oh, who am I if I don't have that? And like I sat in the feeling of being purposelessness and totally lost for about a month. And out pops a new offering where just training a lot of those people in the empowerment on the business side. Like how do I teach those people how to have a sustainable living and create an accountability container where people can launch their ideas and launch their projects. So my new thing is actually a business accelerator. And I didn't know that was going to happen. It's just like what happened on the other side. Yeah.
I love hearing all that. I love specifically. I didn't like the, well, where am I at? I have like three threads that I'm holding right now. There was
Well,
the you naming, like, I'm noticing you're interviewing the interviewer, and I have like a whole conversation that I have in my head around that. And then there's the I'm not the best anymore and other people, and I want to talk about that. And then I like the other thing that's alive is like listening to you sit in the stillness of the what I imagine was uncomfortable,
mm,
like hope, like purpose, purposelessness, uncertainty, being with that. It might not have been, but
which thread is
yeah.
most alive for you?
Uh, I like the one where you called me out on like interviewing the interviewer. That one just feels fun. Because like what was coming up for me in that moment was like I was tracking that I wasn't feeling connected to you, and I went with what felt alive, which was like genuine curiosity. I felt like I was like answering questions in an interview style, and I was like, oh, but I miss Jason right
Mm,
now. Like I feel like I'm just kind of going further and further away from you the more I'm answering. Uh, I don't like that. And so, yeah, that was like my implicit desire and sensations that I was having that had me even motivate myself to ask you a question. Like, and I was like just using the skills in real time. I was like, oh, yeah, I feel that. That's going on. All right. And where could I connect? That's true. I would really love to hear how this has impacted you currently.
yeah,
And just like, and I feel way closer to you right now. Like
totally. Totally.
somatically, I'm like, yay, Jason. You
Yeah.
know?
And I'm tracking three threads as well. Like I feel way closer to you.
Uh,
And yeah, I'm like vibing on you and like really want to teach something valuable for the people listening. And so the second thread is really about um, you notice something inside yourself. And instead of just revealing that, so a lot of times in authentic relating, we said like reveal your experience, right? Why didn't you just say, Jason, I don't feel connected to you? Because the context wasn't appropriate to do that inside of an interview, right? You may have at a different place, but you chose to do something about it. And like that's actually the empowerment of like when we learn to set context and then we practice this muscle of setting context again and again and again, we can literally steer a whole conversation with a single question. We can set context for a new kind of conversation with a single question. And that's kind of what you did in this moment. You were like, I'm going to ask Jason a question that kind of um, lobs the ball in his direction where he's really encouraged to go personal,
mhm,
right? And I imagine you did that for yourself and the listener, um,
mm,
and so like that is the kind of nuance that I think comes from an advanced practitioner, of someone who's been in this for years or has been in it for a while and can use these skills in kind of a nuanced way. is we're
Mhm.
able to kind of create these fields of richness, right?
Mm.
And then the other thing you did is like you were tracking 3 threads, and then you gave yourself the time to lay out those 3 threads and then pick the one that was the most alive. And I
Mhm.
think that is a whole nother principle in teaching that we could go
Mhm.
into about aliveness.
Mhm. Yeah. And like, I'm really loving what you call like advanced practice. To me, it feels integrated.
Yeah.
Like it's beyond advanced practice as much as um, it's like the discomfort of feeling you far away didn't have me feel helpless. I was like, oh, okay. And what do I want to do about that? And where am I at? And what feels good? And what
Hmm.
has consent involved? And like, like you could have said, like, I actually don't want to answer that. Here's what I'd rather say. Like, I trusted you to know what you wanted to do in that moment.
Hmm.
Um, I like there's so many threads right now that we could go down. What feels the most alive for you? Now I'm just being a troll and having fun. Uh, because I mean, like, there's so much we could teach. Like, what would I really want to teach right now if I were asking myself questions? I think instead of teaching more of like naming something that feels important is how helpless I felt for a lot of my life conversations and trusting that somebody was really there if I wasn't constantly giving and things of that nature. And then not really showing up for the connections when somebody was there as well. Like when somebody showed up, how much I would disappear because I didn't know how to be with them or to deal with the vulnerability of actually somebody finally being here. And
Mm.
the the practices have really been clear highways for me eventually. Like they kind of started out like an animal trail through the forest. You know,
Hmm.
you can follow it. Sometimes you have to duck down and kind of contort yourself to go through. But now it feels like I have like really rich highways of how I can connect with me and others.
Hmm.
It doesn't even feel like empowerment. It just feels like I'm connected and that I have the freedom of choice through that ability to really be with what's happening, consider others, even empathize, and then still find that there's a me in here that I can still find what I want and move forward in that direction. Yeah. Mm. And I love that I have the option now to do that and that I feel so much connection. That like I was feeling distant from you and now I feel like, oh man, I'm connecting with Jason right now. And I don't have that little part of me that's like, oh, this feels kind of vulnerable and lonely. Now it's like, oh, hey, what's up, brother? And I'm like, oh, I feel good. I feel like leaning in. I feel warm inside, you know.
Yeah. How often do we have that feeling of helplessness in relationship where it's like, oh, I wish something was different, um, and I don't feel like I have the skill, or I don't feel like I have the right, or I don't feel like I have the rapport with this person to actually do anything about it. So I'm just going to wait for this moment to be over and then, move on and focus on something that I do feel strong in. And so much of authentic relating is about being with that little piece and building
Mm,
one little layer of empowerment and then another little layer of empowerment. And,
mm,
and we call them skills or techniques or tools or teachings and all these things. But really, on the emotional level or on the soul level, it's like these layers of empowerment. And
mm,
I think owning your experience and setting context, like both of these teachings are so central, and they're both about empowerment.
mm,
And a big part of empowerment is like, oh, it feels kind of like shit to give my power away or to like disempower myself in this way, or it feels kind of icky to just not go, like not admit to myself that I have a desire and not speak it out loud, right?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I've had like a whole journey of that too, you know. Like I think one of the biggest changes for me around that is I wouldn't honor that I wanted something. I wouldn't acknowledge it. And I ended up with like a panic attack disorder from it.
Hmm.
And I learned that the thing that I didn't trust was me. I wasn't going to leave a bad situation, or I wasn't going to take the time to even check in with myself. I was going
Yeah.
to keep martyring myself. And finally, I was couldn't sustain it. You know, it wasn't a sustainable model. Uh, yeah. And so I guess I can definitely agree that there's a process of empowerment in that. It doesn't land as empowerment to me. It lands as grounding and then
Hmm.
building the experiences that allow me to believe that something else is possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. And through a different frame, I can see that as empowerment. So,
Yeah, the one way I used to teach it was like, what game are you playing, right?
mm,
What game are you playing right now, and is that the game you want to be playing? Because if you
mm-hmm,
don't like the game, you can change it.
mm-hmm,
And if you notice children, they do this all the time. They're
mm-hmm,
playing one version, and this person is the unicorn, and this person is the tiger, and then they're like switching, and they're making roles for each other, and they're now we're on a safari. Right?
mm-hmm,
They're setting context for the
mm-hmm,
game that they want to be playing all the time. And so
mm-hmm,
it's something that's, I believe, very natural and innate inside of us.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm just touching like what feels like how our frames impact our experiences and our experiences hold our frames.
Mhm.
Mm.
Our frame, can you say more about that? Our frames touch our experiences.
Yeah, well, so if I have the frame that, um, if I were to make up some frames about us, you're only talking to me because you want something out of this conversation to better your life, but don't actually care about me. I could just have that frame and that could be impacting how I see us.
Mhm.
I could be like, oh man, he doesn't actually care. And then I could start building that experience of like being used. Now, and this is just like me riffing. I don't actually feel this. Or I could have the frame that I actually have is uh, my frame of Jason is he sees me as a person. Like this is like what I think you think of me essentially if we were to play that game. Like
Uh-huh.
the frame I have of you is I think that you think I have a good handle of this stuff, that we do things differently. Uh, and I almost imagine you think I'm a bit of a wild card while also having the heart that's in the right place. Uh, that's kind of how I think you see me. And then from that frame, how do I feel about us and how does that impact me? So when I'm with you, there's a part of me that's like, I feel trusted enough, but not actually fully trusted. Uh, and it's how is that impacting my frame of the experience? And so uh, it's a, I feel like we're building rapport is how I'm like my experience. I'm like, okay, we're slowly building connection that has potential. And it seems like neither of us have an attachment to ever being anything substantial while being grateful that it seems pleasant. It's kind of like my experience and tracking and like my frame. And so that's how that's going. And because I'm having an experience that's kind of aligned with my frame, it'll probably continue to be that way until I have an experience that's like, that's not true. I actually have a substantial or he doesn't actually trust me. And like I feel distant and don't want to reconnect, like what's the value of actually bridging the gap of a withhold and like is that in service of both of us if we really take that time. So there's like lots of huge explosion like things that could take place if I have an experience that could change a frame. But my frame and my experience seem pretty uh, congruent for me right now.
Mm. Wow. Okay. So I love that share. Um, I noticed like I want to like kind of bring the dialogue in for a landing, and I don't know how to do it because in a way you're like if I was to do the normal thing that I do in an interview,
Mm,
I would like summarize and simplify what you said
mm,
so that people could like have another angle on it and like grasp it a little bit and maybe
mm,
be able to take it into their life. Um,
mm.
but I'm afraid that if I did that in this instance, I would be playing into the frame that, oh, I don't necessarily care about you. I'm just
Oh, I like that there's almost like a,
it's
like you have to validate my experience by like boiling it down. Uh, I don't want that to be the case. Like I said, I have a nuanced experience of like we have that's my projection in that we care about one another enough to have a pleasant experience, but um the amount of time we talk to one another and the amount of time that we actually invest in each other's lives is more of like the nuance of substantial connection. You know,
yeah.
like I feel like you would be there for me if I asked you to.
Hmm.
And I'm tracking that there are like 20 other people that I would think of first
Hmm.
because of the relationship already experienced is kind of like the nuance that I'm having here.
Hmm.
Yeah. So it's not a judgment of you as much as it's the experience of us so far.
Hmm. So there's an authentic relating tool called Bookmark, um, where it's like I want to bookmark this thing, and I'm actually visualizing like this frame. It's almost
Mm,
like a a board between us. What do they call that? Like a bulletin board. And it's like I want
mm,
to bookmark a sticky note right up here in the upper right. That's where it lives for me for some reason, of like
mm.
substantial connection between Jason and Zach, like and the potential of that and how that could unfold.
What that
Um,
looks like.
and then I want to go back to my original impulse of simplifying or summarizing what you said.
Please
Um,
do.
I love the way you use language. That's the thing that's really interesting for me is that you don't use the same language as a lot of other facilitators. And so I end up doing a lot of translating what you're saying into my own frames or language.
Mm,
Um, and it creates learning for me. And that's why I love dialoguing with you. Um, you're using the word frame, and I would just use the word context, right? It's like our context provides all of the possibilities and limitations of our experience.
mm,
And if we have an experience that's outside the context, we have this opportunity to be like, oh, my context is not actually um, correct. It's just my context. There's no truth
mm,
to it. It's just the story.
mm,
It's the story I'm telling myself about us, right? That's one way
mm,
to say the frame or the context. And we
mm,
need a story. We need a story to function, right? Just like we need an ego to function, but we're not our ego,
mm.
right?
For
And
sure.
our relationship is not the story that I have of it,
Mm,
right? Our relationship
mhm,
is some mysterious thing that's beyond the story I have of it and the story that you have of it.
mhm, mhm,
And like, and it's even beyond the shared overlap of my story and your story about our connection.
mhm. Yeah, it's so much more than that. So much more than that. Um,
And
and I think the nuance that I was really wanted to go ahead. No, you were going to say something.
yeah, I just want to finish that point. Having an experience that's outside of your context, noticing the awkwardness of that is a really important moment
Mm,
because at that moment, we have the choice to just like discount the experience of like, oh, that's an outlier. That data point is an outlier. Or
mhm,
we have the opportunity to be like, can I expand my context?
mm,
Or can I check in with the other person of like, hey, I don't know if we're in a shared context here because I'm having this
mhm,
experience and right. And so um yeah, checking in
mhm, mhm,
about these things is like it's that process of tuning. It's like two musicians who are like, we gotta be in tune
mhm,
if we're gonna play.
mhm, mhm. Yeah. Ugh, I love that. with the triangulating of like where's the discrepancy, like where's the moment where something changed or altered. Yeah, yeah, and um, are you open to me naming the other little nuance that I really wanted to share?
Sure.
If I'm so using your language, a lot of our this is my belief. I don't want to project on everyone else. My belief is that our context comes from our experiences,
Mhm.
and it's our context will stay very similar if we keep having experiences. Yet at the same time, our context will impact our experience. And I think one of the tools that I've learned in authentic relating is doing that checking in that you're talking about. That even if it's an outlier, like what's actually there, and taking the time to attune to like the data point, because that's actually one of my biggest practices in my life right now. It's just how can I let in information and find the grain of truth in it.
Mhm.
And so because I know that my perspective isn't the perspective, my context or my frame. Uh, yeah, and so um, I appreciate you letting me share that.
Mhm. Well, it's beautiful to jam out with you and have some time with you. And um, I'm excited to put this dialogue out there. I know you're going to be a big part of the ALT going forward. And yeah, so I'm excited to see what you do with that and everything else, creating a new community in Puerto Rico when you go down there.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah, thanks for doing this with me today.
For sure, man. It's just been great. Yeah, I appreciate you having me.